this is Jeff, and this is Photoshop, Canvas, Size, and Exporting. So in our previous screencast, we actually looked at how we can get files into Photoshop, and we looked at how we can get around the interface, but now we're going to look at how we can actually export files and what we got to do to resize them in order to do that. So the very first thing that we're going to do is differentiate between canvas size and actual image size. How we're going to do that is we're actually going to go over here and we're going to go to image and we're going to go to canvas size. And notice here it tells us that the size of the canvas is 11.383 by 6.4 inches. Well, that's the actual canvas size. That's actually not the size of the image. And let me show you what I mean by that. I'm going to change this to 14 and I'm going to change this to 9 and we're going to hit OK. Notice, all of a sudden I've got white space out around the sides of my image. Where did that come from? Well, if we hit Command plus or minus, that's Control plus or minus on the Mac, we can do Command minus and we can zoom out a little bit. And we can actually see that we now have in our image a bunch of white space around our picture. Well, that's because the canvas has expanded, but the image itself has not. So literally, this isn't part of the image now as well as far as Photoshop is concerned because it's expanded the canvas, but the image content has not changed. Well, let's actually go over to Edit and do Undo Canvas Size. And let's actually go back to Image and let's do Image Size. We can actually do something similar here. Now, you might remember this from when we looked before at DPI. Here it is down here again, resolution 120 pixels per inch. We're going to leave that just like it is, but I want to change this value. Actually, we're going to change this value here in inches, and we're going to change this to 14, and we're going to change this to 9, and we're going to hit OK. You'll notice that actually this time the image itself got bigger. The image content got bigger. Now, there's a quick warning about sizing images up. Here's the thing. You can't make more data where there is none. So the amount of pixels, the amount of data there is the amount of data. So the more I zoom something up, the cruddier it's going to look because all I'm doing is zooming up the imperfections. It's not going to smooth it out and make it sharper and sharper and sharper. It's not like a police procedural where we can enhance. We can zoom things up a little bit, but if we go too far, it'll look pretty crummy. And let me show you what I mean by that. If we go Control plus or Command plus and I start zooming in, notice things start to get kind of nerdly pretty quick. So I just want you to understand that while we can size things up, we don't want to do that with abandon because it can actually create a problem for us. However, we can also do the reverse. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going back to Edit, and I'm going to do Undo Image Size, and we're back to where we were, and I'm going to do Image Size again, but this time we're going to do something that would be much more practical, that we'd probably do on a regular basis. I actually want to take this down in size. Let's say we wanted to use this for a meme in Facebook. A very common size for that is 800 width. And so I'm going to take it and change this pixels here to 800 width. Now, because this guy right here, this link is enabled, it keeps the aspect ratio. So if I change this to 500, notice the height beneath it also gets smaller. It'll keep the ratio of the two values the same. It keeps the picture from being distorted. So I'm going to take this back to 800 like we originally did. I'm going to hit OK. And my image is smaller. Now, that is really useful when I actually need to take something out to Facebook or to the web, and it has to be a specific size or it has to be a very specific dimension. I can actually go into Photoshop here and save my image in specifically that size. Okay, so let's actually go through the work of what we need to do to actually export this, to use it actually somewhere else. So, first thing I'm going to do is that I want the image size to be smaller. Let's look at the image size on this. It's 1366. That's too wide. I want to use it for something that would be good for Facebook. So I'm going to say 800 width is going to be good for me. So we're going to say OK. And we've resized it. So that seems to be working really well for us. But what do we do with it now? Well, I'm actually going to go File. I'm going to use Save As. And notice I went to Save As here. Hang on, let's go back and show you that again. Notice I go to Save As instead of Export. Export is a different thing, actually, believe it or not, in Photoshop. So when people are actually thinking Export, we're actually thinking usually Save As. That's actually the tool that we're really usually looking for. So I'm going to do Save As. And we're actually going to go down here and we're going to find a place to put this. I'm actually going to say my desktop is fine. We don't want to call it this because I don't want it actually to be a JPEG. And we're actually going to talk about file formats for a moment. So let's actually drop down what the options are. Now, in case you can't see what they are, sometimes you want to see where you're at. So I've expanded here where we can actually see the other files next to this. Let's drop this out, and you can see here the different file formats available. So let me talk about, for just a quick moment, about the different ones that you're more likely to use. Most of the time, you will be using Photoshop, or Photoshop EPS, or Photoshop PDF, PNG, or JPEG. The reason you'll be using these files most often is that they're the most commonly used. They're also the most versatile. You can't use Photoshop except for usually in actual Adobe applications. So while I'm going to save it this way for a moment here, we're actually going to come back and save it as a JPEG here in a second. So I'm actually going to call this Photoshop example 1. And we're going to save it, and this is a PSD. Why would I want to save it as a PSD as opposed to other things? Well, I want to save it as a PSD because PSDs actually don't lose any of their editability. Actually, they keep all their data content and all their undos and things like that. So essentially, as long as I don't specifically delete content out of the PSD, it has all the original data. So I've got this PSD. Now let's say I wanted to save it though, so I wanted to go like direct to Facebook or something like that for it. I can do Save As, and I can select, say, JPEG. That's a pretty good format. Notice the extension changes up here, and I'm going to hit Save. It's going to give me a slightly different dialog here. Because the JPEG is not lossless, is not holding on to all the data like the PSD is, it's actually going to ask me, well, how much do I want to compress this file? Quality 10 is fine. That's a very high quality file. It's probably overkill for something like Facebook or the web. Probably a 8 would be fine, but let's just hit OK for now. Alright, so we now have a JPEG version of that same file. What if, though, we actually wanted to do something slightly different? What if we actually wanted to make sure this actually goes out to the web, and we had where we really wanted to make it a very compressed file format, so that we actually made sure that like we were really maximizing our data traffic? Like, let's say we're using it in a mobile website or something, a website that you would view from your phone. Well, there's actually a tool that really is good for that. So let's do, in that case, Save for Web. Save for Web is pretty cool. It actually is one of the things that goes back a ways to Photoshop and it being paired with a product that was originally called by Adobe ImageReady. And it lets you kind of choose the level of compression that you're going to be able to access. Now, most people are thrown that one of the things it does right off the bat is that on a lot of stuff it's going to suggest GIF, because GIFs actually have a limited color palette, and actually that's how they maximize their compression. And it can actually bring a 103 meg file, as you see here, down to a 141.7K file. Now, I know what I just said about, PNGs and JPEGs, but that was typically talking about stuff that you're not going to the web for. This is a different situation. However, if you wanted to do one of the other formats, they're here also. So let's do PNG 8. And notice we can actually do something similar in PNG. It's about 107K here versus a meg up here, roughly. So let's go ahead and save. It's going to ask me again. Usually if I'm going to save something like this, I'm going to actually save it to the same location, and I'm going to actually say small behind it, and we're going to actually hit save. Now, let's actually go and take a look real quick at what we've done. So we have 3 different versions of the file. We have the PSD, we have a JPEG, and we have a small PNG. So let's do a quick comparison. I'm going to do get info on each of these. And if you look, the dimensions on all 3 are exactly the same. But the file size, 864 versus 111 versus 115, are different. And that speaks to the whole difference of their different strengths of different file types. The PSD over here is always going to be about maintaining quality, about making sure that we can actually change it. The JPEG is going to try and look sharp and efficient at whatever size it is, and the PNG just has a slightly different compression algorithm than the JPEG does. Each has their strengths, each has their weaknesses, but this kind of gives you an idea of how you have to think about that coming out of Photoshop and what format that you need to select.